Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Truth Seeker here. Just got back from a little vacation down in South Carolina, where it's still summer-like down there. The ocean temperature was 81 and degrees Fahrenheit, that is, and the air temperature was in the low to mid 80s. In fact, the first day we were there, it was in the 90s on the inland part of Myrtle Beach. The actual coast itself was a little cooler, but it felt like mid-July when we first got down there. It was beautiful, and I needed a little vacation, but we didn't know whether or not we were going to get any time off down there because of Hurricane Florence that had passed through the area earlier in September, and we were not sure of the amount of damage that had been done. And I called the hotel repeatedly to make sure that everything was okay, and I was going to use the word copacetic. I just learned something while we were on vacation. The word copacetic, if anybody knows who Bill Bojangles Robinson is, probably one of the greatest dancers of all time, better than Fred Astaire. He was the person that coined the word copacetic. I had no idea. Anyway, we thought that everything was going to work out well, and when we got down there, the weather was beautiful, the beach was beautiful, and 2 days into our vacation, and we hear news of another hurricane, Michael, that just cropped up out of nowhere and almost instantly blew up into almost a Category 5 hurricane, about as close to a Category 5 you can get without being one. I guess when it hit Florida's Panhandle, it bloomed into a very strong Category 4. It was 2 miles an hour less than a Category 5. It did fantastic, catastrophic damage down in that area. And boy, we were worried about what happens if this thing tracks towards us, because we were that terribly far away, only several hundred miles, and hurricanes are notorious for not being predictable. So it was our luck to get down there when another hurricane came through. But we had a good time. What happened was the hurricane skirted by us to the west. It hit South Carolina, but it was about 60 miles to our west, and all the rain and damaging winds were more to the west of us and south of us in Georgia and Florida. And the area we were in, it bypassed. We got quite a bit of wind. I'd say the day the storm went by, which was, I believe, last Thursday, the winds were about a sustained 30 to 40 miles an hour. So we were getting tropical force winds, but there wasn't any damage, and we virtually got no rain. Periodically, a shower would pass through, but we weren't on that side of the storm where all of the rain fell. There were areas that there were 7 inches of rain in parts of North Carolina and Virginia to the north of us. So anyway, we did get a restful time, and we walked on the beach to the best of my ability. My knees are not very good, but we did as much walking as we could, and we had some bright sunny days. We did some swimming. The ocean was beautiful. The water temperatures were, like I said, were very mild. The area is very nicely developed, and in fact, I'll put on a clip for you as I discuss things. But I've been keeping tabs on some of the videos that Lloyd Evans has been putting out lately, and there are a couple of interesting things that are happening that I wanted to lend some observations to. Most recently, there were 3 videos in particular that the Cedar's channel put out, and the first one was an in focus regarding the a sex abuse child sex abuse trial in Montana. The interesting thing about that, besides the amount that Watchtower was penalized, and it was a substantial amount of money. It was a civil case, and the plaintiff was a young girl whose stepfather apparently abused her severely, and apparently it was a pretty heart-wrenching circumstance. John Redwood of the Cedars channel and JW Survey reported on that trial. He flew out to Montana and actually, I guess, served as a consultant to the defense team to some extent. He does that with or not the defense team, I'm sorry, the plaintiff. He does that with these sex abuse cases. He will consult with the lawyers to talk about Jehovah's Witnesses, their policies, their lack of protection, their historic stance on child sex abuse, and how it's not, their policies are not conducive to protecting children in their own homes, basically. I mean, in the kingdom halls and in their own homes. The key thing about Jehovah's Witnesses is that they don't believe in approaching the authorities. They want to handle all matters internally, and they set up these judicial committees, and these judicial committees handle all matters internally, and some of these matters are criminal matters that really should be. I mean, child sex abuse is a criminal matter and should not be handled internally. It should be a matter of calling the police and letting the authorities, the proper authorities, handle these cases. But that's not the case with Jehovah's Witnesses. But in this Montana case, it was a particularly egregious case, and the plaintiff was suing for $2 million, and apparently the situation was so heart-wrenching, so bad, that the jury when it came to settling the matter and discussing whether or not the plaintiff had a case and whether or not what the award should be if indeed Watchtower was guilty. And the jury came back with a $4 million judgment for the plaintiff, so that was twice the amount. And the plaintiff's lawyer, apparently there were some legal technicalities that were discovered during this trial that indicated that Montana law was broken by the way Watchtower handled the situation. And in a civil case, when regulations and laws are violated, the assessment is a mandatory assessment that has to be judged and assessed against the guilty party. So the judge sent the jury back into session, and I think there is a formula that indicates that they have to assess a certain percentage of the net worth of the organization being sued, and so they had to have an accurate assessment of Watchtower's value, assets, and that includes, its income, its the amount of money it holds, its properties, its the values of Watchtower as a society. Watchtower is divided up into many different corporate entities, like a lot of corporations. The company I work for is divided up into something like 400 different corporate legal entities. And there are various reasons for that. And the same thing goes for Watchtower. So the lawsuit was brought against Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York and the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, and those were the two legal entities. And so they limited the assessment, financial assessment, to those two legal entities. Now, I think that it's the first time anybody's gotten any kind of reliable amount of worth from Watchtower themselves. This case is unique in that sense, and I don't think that they met the. I think in the end, the jury added $31 million to the $4 million assessment, making it a $35 million judgment against Watchtower altogether. And of course, Watchtower will appeal this judgment, as they do in every case. They fight tooth and nail. I'm just thinking of the irony of when somebody sues you in court. Jesus said, when somebody takes you to court and sues you for your jacket, give them, turn the other cheek, basically. Slaps you on one cheek, turn the other cheek and let them slap you on the other side. If somebody sues you in court for your shoes, give them your coat too. The Christian thing to do, according to the Bible, in these matters, is to give them more than what they've asked for in court, what they sued for in court. That's biblical, and and Jesus emphasized that in a parable, in a lesson. And so Watchtower doesn't live by the Bible's precepts, because they fight tooth and nail against these court assessments, and they appealed them. They appealed Candace Conti and had that case reduced, that judgment reduced substantially. The Louis Lopez case was a little different because they were found contempt of court, and when they were in contempt of court, there's little chance for them to appeal. They appealed the assessment that was levied against them for the contempt of court, which was a $2,000 a day fine per day of violating the court's order. And so far that fine, that assessment for contempt of court, is over $2 million. Watchtower appealed that judgment, and the state of California Appeals Court upheld the assessment levied by the court against Watchtower. So Watchtower wasn't successful there in that appeal on the contempt of court. So Louis Lopez won $13 million from Watchtower because Watchtower defaulted the case. They didn't pursue it. They just dropped the case. In this case in Montana, however, is a little different, and they took it to the end rather than settle. And as a result, they had to reveal financial information that they've never revealed before. And they were also the condition of the situation was so awful that the jury awarded the largest fine ever levied against Watchtower in these sorts of cases since Watchtower has begun facing these sex abuse allegations. I understand that there are circumstances where they do settle out of court, and when they do settle out of court, they put caveats to the settlement where they don't talk about, they put clauses in on the agreement that they have to, the person they're settling with has to agree to keep quiet about the amount, and that they can't talk about the case at all. And so in situations where there's an out-of-court settlement, there are these binders on the agreement, and so little information really comes out of these. Although Watchtower does have to pay some amount, whatever that amount is, for the particular settlement that they've agreed to. Now, in those situations, I think there are probably more of those situations than where they go through the entire court case, because it costs a lot of money to try a case all the way through. And so, and in these cases, Watchtower has been losing when they try these cases all the way through. I think not only are the cases so awful, so the conditions that are being described are so terrible that these settlements are large as a result. But it's Watchtower's reluctance to accept let's say, worldly help. They're handling these cases on their own, and I don't think their legal department is sufficient enough to to ward off or to handle these cases in the, let's say, in the best interest of Watchtower. These are special cases, and you would think that they would get counsel that would specialize in this sort of thing, but these that's not the case. It sounds like Watchtower's using their own lawyers, their own legal team. I know in situations where my company gets involved in legal situations, they hire outside expertise for the particular case that they're involved in, and so they get the the best that they can in that in that legal area. It doesn't sound like Watchtower does that, and from what John Redwood indicates, their legal team bungles. It apparently, to the layman, their bungling of these cases is so blatant that they're losing large amounts in these cases because of their lack of empathy. They're just bungling these cases, so they don't know what they're doing, and it could be the end of Watchtower. As these cases multiply in number. It's like the Catholic Church. More and more awareness is occurring with these cases that Watchtower, they don't have anywhere near the resources of the Catholic Church in handling these things from a financial perspective. And so this could be ultimately the ruin of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. And it's quite possible. And that would be a good thing, actually. Not that the circumstances are good. But if they're not willing to change their policies, this silly two-witness rule, it's not only silly, but it leads to terrible abuse situations. So you would think that they adjust their policies, but they're unwilling to do so. They're just so adamant about their being right that they deserve whatever they get. They deserve it. And if it puts them out of business, good. They need to be out of business. And they need to be out of business for many reasons. Not only for their lack of concern for children, but also what they're doing to families and destroying families, and the shunning policy, and a number of other things. So that's one case that is of particular interest to follow, and John Cedar's channel is doing an excellent job of following these things, because they go right into the cases in their in-focus analysis. So look for those in-focus episodes on the John Cedar's channel, because they are very well done. They're well explained, and John Redwood does an excellent job of following these cases. So that is something. it turns out that the financial disclosure that Watchtower gave for the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York and Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses was over $1 billion. There was there was a New York, let's say there was a Newsweek article in 2004 or 2002, I forget which now, that identified Watchtower as in the top 40 earning businesses in New York City in terms of revenue. They made the list of the top 40, and they weren't down near the bottom. They were in the 30s somewhere, so they weren't at the bottom. There were firms, companies, corporations that earned less than they did. They were at the time roughly about $1 billion a year in revenue. Now there was no mention about how that information was obtained, so that is something that wasn't disclosed in the article, and having what kind of confidence we could put in that estimate, is questionable. But this latest trial in Montana, that was something that was required by law by the state of Montana to have an accurate estimate of its assets, its net worth. I think it was like $1.5 billion, but again, that didn't cover all of Watchtower's legal entities. They own properties and under other corporate names throughout the world, so they're definitely a multi-billion-dollar operation. But when you have 20,000 cases of child sex abuse and you're averaging $10 million a case, I'm just throwing that out. I didn't get that from anything, but you have 35 million, you have 13 million, and Candace Conti ended up under 10 million. So you could say, just from that, an average of, let's say, roughly $10 million dollars a case times 20,000 cases. Let's see. 21,000. And you got a lot of money. You got a couple $1 trillion. That's beyond their reach. Yeah, that's $2.1 trillion. That's a lot of money. I don't think that's a reasonable estimate, but these cases haven't been going their way, and if they're averaging $10 million a case, then they're certainly going to be put out of business. That's for sure. The next thing that of interest with the John Cedars channel was the annual meeting. Apparently this year there was a release of a book. It covered the book of Ezekiel. And you know what I'm going to do? Instead of you guys looking at me, I'm going to just talk over a video that gives you a little view of Myrtle Beach while I'm talking. So this way you got something better than me to look at. So here goes. What you're watching now is a drone flight that I programmed while I was down there on the day after Michael passed by, and you could see how calm it is. There was no wind. It was bright, beautiful sunny day, and so enjoy the view while I'm chatting. There's another In Focus that I listened to on our ride home yesterday with Lloyd Evans and John Redwood and Covert Fade and a guest person who from Romania. I can't remember his name right now, but anyway, they invited him on to discuss the topic of the annual meeting. Now, it's interesting because when I was at the Dawn, my wife and I worked at the Dawn. The big event every year was the annual meeting, and the Board of Trustees got together once a year at the beginning of October or November, first weekend of November, to discuss the business aspects of the Dawn. And it was a big political thing. The wives got together and they went into New York and they walked around New York City and did shopping and stuff. And it was, the elite of the Bible students were the individuals who were the trustees of the Dawn. Yes, there was an elite group. So it kind of brought back memories to hear about the annual meeting of the Watchtower, to think about the annual meeting times that we prepared for once a year. In the 10 years we were at the Dawn, my wife cooked for that event, and I helped her prepare for that event, because we would have at least 50 to sometimes 100 individuals come at annual meeting time, and hated it because of the politics. And Bible students weren't supposed to have politics, but there were politics up the wazoo. And I'm sure it's the same with the Watchtower. The one thing that they noted was different from recent years. In recent years, the Watchtower opened up its business meetings to rank and file, and would broadcast the entire meeting all around the world, globally, piped it into all Kingdom Halls. And that was a new level of transparency for Watchtower that was unprecedented, that to allow for everybody to be able to see this. In the past, apparently these were pretty much closed door meetings. If they weren't private, they were semi-private, with a limited group of people privy to the proceedings of the annual meeting. And this annual meeting is a tradition that goes all the way back to Russell's day. They had an annual meeting. Of course, when Russell was the president and he was the founder and president of the Watchtower Society. Basically, what Russell said went. He called the shots, and so there wasn't any. I mean, whatever he wanted, it was going to go his way anyway. So basically, it was window dressing, basically, to have this annual meeting. You see here, this is a really pretty section of beach. And there's still some undeveloped areas along Myrtle Beach that were very pretty. But it turns out that this year, for whatever reason, the governing body decided to limit the access to the broadcast of the annual meeting. They did not open the annual meeting to the rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses, and it seems to me that that's a significant reversal. I think that they were talking about sensitive subjects that obviously that they didn't want the rank and file to hear, and it probably had to do with their finances, and also I would suspect the sex abuse cases, and how things aren't working out so well for Watchtower in these court proceedings. So I can understand why they would want to limit the audience to a relatively small number. And but there was what was known was that there was a release of a new book on Ezekiel, and it was interesting to me because. As you know, I'm interested in the history of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and apparently the last book that Watchtower issued on the topic, or the book of Ezekiel, was some 50 years ago, and prior to that. It might have been another 50 years prior to that since they had issued some kind of a discussion or notes on the book of Ezekiel, and it was a controversial situation. And what I'm talking about is the 7th volume. When Rutherford became president of the society, he went ahead and commissioned George Fisher and Clayton Woodworth to work clandestinely on compiling Russell's notes on the book of Ezekiel. And so it wasn't done. It wasn't really. It was more of a compendium of notes than it was a book. It wasn't really a book. And when you read it, it goes verse by verse in Ezekiel, and the commentary. It's more of a commentary format, where Russell apparently were Russell's thoughts on particular scriptures that were given, and they called it the 7th volume. It wasn't written in the same tradition as the first 6, which were more finished books, the actual books. So Ezekiel is one of those very strange books. It's a lot of revelation. The book of Revelation it comes out of the book of Ezekiel, and a lot of the imagery, a lot of the symbolisms that you find in Revelation are found in the book of Ezekiel. Especially in the first chapter of Ezekiel, you have these four beasts that have the face of an ox, an eagle, a man, and I forget what the other is. And they represented. Russell said they represented God's power, love, and justice, and I forget what they are now. But there were four character attributes of Russell said the four character attributes of God, and they were represented by these four faces on the beast, and the beast had 6 wings, and this was taken out of Ezekiel, and the 4 beasts also show up in Revelation. You have God sitting on his throne in Ezekiel, and a rainbow around the throne, and in Revelation you have the same imagery. You have the same. You have God sitting on the throne, and you have a green, an emerald-colored rainbow about the throne, encircling the throne, and so you have similar imagery, and the 4 beasts standing before the throne, and each beast opens a seal, and so there's a lot of strange symbolisms in both Ezekiel and Revelation that are tied in together, and so that was what the 7th volume did. It was a compendium of Russell's ideas and notes of the 2 books of Ezekiel and Revelation. Because they seem to have a strong correlation one to another. Apparently, there isn't much known about this new book, except that there were snippets of information apparently that were revealed, and so Lloyd and his team analyze some of those things. I'm not going to go into it because basically these symbolisms, these books, they could mean anything. They believe that Ezekiel and parts of Ezekiel, especially the part where there's talks about Gog and Magog, have a close connection to the end times, that they represent Armageddon, and that they recount the events of the end of the world. So we're coming to the end of my Myrtle Beach video here, so pretty soon you'll have to take a look at me again. But these symbolisms, really, I mean, they're anybody's guess as to what they could mean. They're pretty wild, pretty outlandish type of imagery that's used in these. You have the bones, and the bones come together with flesh, and Watchtower apparently gives it some symbolism that represents their society, and I guess Russell's in there somewhere, and then they have Gog and Magog coming down to attack Israel, and I guess Israel symbolically represents Gog of Magog, and that represents the end times and the persecutions that come down against God's true people, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and then there's I guess this book runs on through to the end of the 1,000 years. It even discusses the rebellion that's described in Revelation 20, where Satan is released from his bottomless pit and comes out and deceives the nations in the four quarters of the earth. And that particular scripture, I have a real problem with, because how wise, how the Jehovah's Witnesses religion, their beliefs have the vast majority of humanity being slaughtered, and you've got the Armageddon at the beginning of the 1,000 years, where 7.5 billion people are slaughtered. They admit that there are billions upon billions that will be slaughtered at the beginning of the 1,000-year kingdom. But what is perplexing to me is that after 1,000 years of righteousness, of 1,000 years of people living in harmony together and singing Kumbaya every night around the campfire and eating fruit and petting lions and living with the wild animals and being at one with the universe, none shall hurt, and all my holy mountain, and all will know me, that they shall not say, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least to the greatest, and all of that perfect world of the 1,000-year kingdom, ruled by Jesus and the 144,000, doesn't apparently have such a successful impact on humanity, because at the end of the 1,000 years, it says that the number of people who are deceived by Satan once he's released from his bottomless pit is as of the sands of the sea, and that is a huge number, and they encompass the camp of the saints. Again, now I'm using the King James versions because I'm not familiar with the New World Translation. I think it's an ugly translation anyway, but we Bible students used the King James version mostly, although we used a lot of different other, like the NIV, and we used whatever version got the thought that we would want across the best. But I think by far and large the Bible students use the King James version more so than other translations. But certainly it was my preference to use the King James. But yeah, that they encompass the camp of the saints, and if it wasn't for God's intervention, it sounds as if the God's kingdom would succumb to the rebellion that occurs at the end of the 1,000 years. How successful is that? I mean, if God has to rain fire upon them to destroy them before they destroy his order, it doesn't sound like God's kingdom is very effective. It doesn't sound like he's all that omniscient to have the vast majority of it seems to me that people, and God's making humans and making humans independent in their thought as free moral agents, was a big mistake. And the Jehovah's Witness doctrine just substantiates that and emphasizes it even more, because you've got billions upon billions upon billions of people who end up dead under their beliefs, and that it's a relative few that go on to live forever. And who is to say that after 1,000 years of perfection and righteous rule, that there wouldn't be other rebellions? If people rebel after 1,000 years of righteousness, and God has to destroy them, how can we be guaranteed that that's it? That everything is going to be perfect from here on to eternity? I mean, they don't think about that. They don't think about how limited and how feeble their belief system is. Because if people can't be trusted under the most ideal of circumstances, how could they ever be trusted? So, these are things that I really struggled with in the Bible students, and with the Jehovah's Witnesses even more so, because they have the vast majority of people die, and that is an awful thing. But of course, that all reflects back to Rutherford's view of things. This idea of Armageddon and the Jonadab class, and the fact that there would be a relative few that pass into the kingdom after Armageddon, and all of that is really Rutherford, who had a very awful viewpoint of humankind. He did not think highly of humans, and I think that he equated most people as aligning with Satan, and that they were aligned with the Catholic Church, which was Satan's organization, and that people couldn't be trusted, and that the world was out to get them, both the secular world and the religious world, Christendom, and they were all under Satan's influence and power, and good riddance to the world when God gets rid of everybody. And so, he had no qualms against the vast majority of humans being killed, and that's a legacy. That belief is really a legacy of Rutherford. Which brings me to another point. The recent Lloyd Evans channel, the John Cedar's channel, he's got a special that he's been doing on Rutherford. It's a two-part. He's done part one. I don't think he's released part two yet, but it was upon the request of the Patreons, and so he's accommodating his Patreons by doing this expose of Rutherford and his presidency and who he was as a man, and it's not a pretty picture. I mean, he's really the one that shaped he had taken Russell's beliefs and then remolded them to fit his ideas of humanity, and also to accommodate the growth of the organization. There was a when he came up with the Jonadab class, you see the beliefs of Russell didn't allow for much growth in the organization. To believe that the call that was the message at the time was only to the 144,000 means that you have to have less than 144,000 who are being called. And so if you had 1 million people, then your idea, let's say 1 million people joined your religion, and you're saying there are only 144,000 places in heaven for people, you're not going to create a religious environment that is conducive to growth, a bunch of religious teachings that is conducive to growing the organization. Well, Rutherford fixed that by claiming that the great company or great crowd, he named the Jonadab class, New Light, in the mid-1930s, represented a human class, that they were an earthly class, and that Russell taught that the great company were those that were running for the 144,000, what he called the prize of the high calling, and that those that didn't really meet the criteria for being one of the 144,000, yet weren't evil. They had given up their life rights in the kingdom. They're by consecrating and being baptized for the 144,000, they had given up their right to a resurrection as a human in the 1,000 years. So what do you do with these people? They're not evil, but they didn't qualify for the 144,000. So Russell had this basically an also-ran class, which he called the Great Company, and these would be those that didn't qualify to die, but didn't qualify to be part of the 144,000. And Rutherford changed that doctrine around and said the great crowd were really a earthly class, and that they were the ones that were going to live through Armageddon, and these were the ones that are being addressed to in the work of the Watchtower at this time, because the call for the 144,000 was winding down. That the gospel age, the age in which the Lord was choosing members of the 144,000, was coming to a close, but that there were those that were going to respond and pass through the Armageddon, the destruction of Armageddon, and inherit the earth. And that's what this great cloud class was, and that these were an earthly class, and that they constituted the Jehovah's Witness movement of the time. And so that was the idea, and it allowed for uninhibited growth for the Watchtower. And so the focus shifted from the call to the 144,000 to getting as many people to join the Jehovah's Witnesses as possible to pass into the 1,000-year kingdom, through passing through Armageddon, gaining Jehovah's protection, and being there to set up God's order on earth. He needed some nucleus of people to establish God's kingdom at the very beginning, after Armageddon Um, Armageddon is done. Let's see. I lost my screen here, and there we go. We're back again. Um, so that was the idea of that was a major doctrinal shift. This idea of the Jonadives, and it was a watershed for the Watchtower, because then it allowed for it to grow into the organization it is today, with 8 million members. But when you compare 8 million people to 7.5 billion, and you say that the majority of those people are going to die in Armageddon and never have a chance for life, it's kind of it's a harsh and cold. It's not a very loving teaching. It really sends a message that people deserve to die. That God doesn't care for the majority of his creation, human creation. Only the relative handful, the 8 million or so people. It's an awful teaching. It's an awful teaching because the fact of the matter is that most people are good. Most people, everybody's got bad in them. Everybody has even Jehovah's Witnesses. I know Bible students, in the meetings and in the conventions, they're all lovey-dovey and everybody's wonderful but that's a facade. They're humans. They have their moments, their bad days, and we're all human. And I've seen people in the world, quote unquote world, that have done finer things, better things, were better people than those that have accepted the truth. So I think it's an awful cold religion. It's not a very empathetic religion, and it means that they have to look at people in a very negative way, and they don't find the majority of humanity worthwhile to save, that they should die. And this includes billions of children who've never had a chance. Now, how do they deserve to die? Because of their parents? The children don't know any better. So how do they deserve to die? That's an awful thing to believe. But again, we can see the Watchtower leadership and the Watchtower organization is not very empathetic to children. The sex abuse cases are evident of that. But I think it's important to understand Judge Rutherford, because his character. Now, I don't think Russell was really great. He put these people in power. He chose A.H. McMillan. He chose Clayton Woodworth. He chose Judge Rutherford. He chose these people to be around him. He knew who they were. He knew what kind of people they were. So he was no great shakes himself. But Rutherford's character was infused into the organization, and it's still there today. This organization, this group called Jehovah's Witnesses, is a legacy of JF Rutherford. And all of the let's say, the attributes and the characteristics of the religion that lack empathy towards people, lack love, lack any kind of care for humanity in general. Um, that all originates from Joseph Rutherford, and not that I don't think that I think Russell was maybe a kinder person. I mean, he did have a following that was they were diehards, and eventually most of those that joined the Watchtower during Rutherford's or Russell's lifetime, the majority of them left. So there was only about a quarter or so that remained with the Watchtower of the original Bible students in the long run, and those numbers are the numbers that William Schnell gives. I think they can be substantiated by other information that I found. There's a trial, a court case in 1946 that was against the Dawn Bible students, and in that case, Norman Woodworth had to give a description of the Bible students movement, and he claimed that at that time there were about 56,000 Bible students. If you go to JW Facts, you find that around 1927, 26, 27, 25, 26, 27, there's roughly 90, a little under 90,000 in memorial attendance. So the claim that 75% left in 1928 pretty much holds together, because I'd say the majority regrouped in the 1930s and 40s, and the number 56,000 that was given in the court case that I mentioned is reasonable. They didn't recover entirely. They didn't recoup most of the Bible students that left. Are not all of the Bible students that left, but they got the majority of them. Let's say the memorial figure shows 17,000 in 1928. So that would have left. That would have been. There were close to 80, or close to let's say there were 87,000. In 1927 that celebrated memorial, 17,000 left. So that meant that there were 70,000 that left. 56,000 is the majority of that. I mean, of 70,000. So yeah, there were 20,000 unaccounted for, less than 20,000 unaccounted for, 56,000 Bible students in the 1940s is the majority of those that left. These were the Russellites. These were those that Rutherford had to get rid of because of their devotion to Russell, and that was that work of cleansing or gleaning the ones that would remain loyal to Watchtower, or most loyal to Watchtower. That occurred from the time Rutherford became president in 1917 to the early 1930s, when they changed the name to Jehovah's Witnesses. So the majority of the Bible students, of the Watchtower followers, transitioned into Jehovah's Witnesses in the early 30s. There was a small amount, a smaller number in 1930-31 following Watchtower. Then left. The number of people who left, the number of Bible students who left Watchtower was by far much greater. It was just that they were in a state of disarray. They didn't have a central organization. The Watchtower, was a central and tightly controlled organization, so they were poised. They were in a better position for growth. They had the money, they had the resources, and they had a very loyal nucleus from which to build. And whereas the Bible students didn't have that, and they were distrustful of organizations as a result of what happened with Rutherford and the Watchtower, and they were in a state of disarray in the 1930s. It's amazing that they regrouped at all, but they did, and they still exist today, although in a much more diminished. There are very few Bible students left, especially in the United States. Probably a couple thousand, 2,000-3,000 at most in the United States. Maybe worldwide, there could be maybe 20,000. That's a complete guess. It could be much less than that. The number of Bible students has really diminished tremendously, and nobody's ever taken account. There has been no survey, there has been no census taken of Bible students throughout the world. So anyway, I just wanted to point out those three videos, the two in focus, the one on the annual meeting, the one on the trial in Montana, and the annual meeting, and the Joseph Rutherford videos. Those three in particular are very worth listening to. And so anyway, this is Truth Seeker, and I wish you all the best, and back again, and I hope you enjoyed the little video of Myrtle Beach. So have a good day.